Good evening, everyone. I hope you can all hear me. Welcome to our first virtual Unpacking the Book, Jewish Writers in Conversation. My name is Jenna Weiss, and I'm the Manager of Public Programs at the Jewish Museum. Tonight's talk, Life, a Work in Progress, featuring authors Josh Gondel and Rebecca Dinerstein-Knight in conversation with Stephanie Butnick, is co-presented with Jewish Book Council. I would like to take a moment to thank our incredible partners there and all of the speakers for their flexibility to turn this program around so quickly, given our current situation. If this is your first time attending an Unpacking the Book event, welcome. You can watch footage from the first event of the series, held at the Jewish Museum back in February, on the Jewish Book Council's YouTube page. And stay tuned for details about our final event with authors Esther Safran Foer and Keith Gesson on April 30th. Now is usually when I would remind people to silence their cell phones, but instead I would simply like to welcome Naomi Firestone Teeter, Executive Director of Jewish Book Council, to share a little bit more about tonight's program.
Thank you, Jenna. I'm so excited to welcome you all to the very first, and definitely not the last, it seems, virtual Unpacking the Book, Jewish Writers in Conversation, co-presented with the Jewish Museum. As I say before each of our events, the Unpacking series is one of the highlights of our year, a chance to bring together individuals who have written important works about life, identity, and history for meaningful conversations about the Jewish community. Now more than ever, we're so proud to bring the community together, whether it's physical or virtual, for these literary discussions. For those of you unfamiliar with Jewish Book Council, our mission is to enrich and educate the community through Jewish literature, from public programs such as this one, awards and conferences, to essays by Jewish authors, book club resources, interviews, and reading lists. JBC provides tools for substantive conversations about Jewish life and identity. We have some incredible digital content on our website, across our social media platforms, and through our emails each week, and I encourage you to find out more at jewishbookcouncil.org. Before we begin tonight's program, I'd like to very quickly thank the people and organizations that have made this evening possible. The Jewish Museum for their very generous support, specifically Jenna Weiss, and our wonderful media sponsor, Tablet Magazine, the premier publication of Jewish news and ideas in the US. A very special thank you to JBC's own Miri Pomerantz-Dauber for all of her hard work on this evening's event, and I'm especially grateful to JBC's board of directors for their continued support of Jewish literature, ideas, and conversation. A few housekeeping notes before I pass the baton. The chat feature for this conversation has been turned off, making sure it's off. If you would like to ask a question of our panelists, or to the Jewish Museum, or to JBC, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. You can also email us throughout the conversation at info@jewishbooks.org. My colleague Simona will be adding links to the chat section, including links to purchase the books if you have not already done so. She'll be adding those after the introduction. Finally, I'm going to be enjoying my book-inspired drink throughout the conversation. This one is Josh's Dirty Vodka Quarantini, and I hope you will do the same. You can find the drink recipes, including Rebecca's Hex Citrus Sanitizer, on the event page for this program. Also, please tag us in your photos with the books and drinks so that we can reshare them. And now I'd like to introduce you to our moderator. Stephanie Butnick is the deputy editor of Tablet and a host of Unorthodox, the leading Jewish podcast on iTunes. She is the author, along with co-host, of the newest Jewish encyclopedia, From Abraham to Zabars and Everything in Between. And she helped edit Tablet's brand new Passover Haggadah. An important note before we begin, the Haggadah is still available for purchase on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. And Tablet is offering 8 packs directly from the publisher today and tomorrow. We'll be adding a link to the chat screen in a few minutes so that you can purchase that. And with that, I thank you for joining us, and please enjoy the evening.
Hello. I've been unmuted, I've been unleashed, and so have my two panelists today, Josh Gondel, Rebecca Dinerstein-Knight. I'm really glad to be here with both of you. As Jenna mentioned, the theme of tonight's event is Life, a Work in Progress, and both of your books explore the at times funny, serious, and often unnerving business of being human today. And that feels really right, given the circumstances. We were obviously supposed to be at the Jewish Museum in their grand events hall, and instead we are here in my bedroom. and in your various houses. But I'm so glad we could sort of continue to be together, Josh, Rebecca, and all of you beautiful people who we can't see, and hopefully, don't have to even be wearing regular clothes like we are. So first, I want to check in with you, Josh and Rebecca. How are you both doing in sort of with the craziness that's going on, and where are you? Where are we seeing you?
I'll go first. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us here in this alternate form tonight. It's really generous of you to make the jump with us, and really generous of the Jewish Museum and Tablet and the JBC, the Jewish Book Council, for making the switch. It's really important to us, and I hope it's just as much fun for you. I'm in New Hampshire, where I live. I grew up in Manhattan, but my husband and I moved up to New Hampshire, and we live in a really sweet old farmhouse with floral wallpaper that came with the house, but we put the peach up. But these are the snowy trees. We've still got snow. We still got trees, but we've also still got snow. And that's where I am. What about you, Josh?
I'm in Brooklyn at my apartment. I am kind of hunkered down. What is it? We're sheltering in place, and I'm very fortunate to be here with my wife. We have a fat little pug who might be making an appearance later. It's been requested, and I'm very lucky to be. I feel very fortunate to be in kind of a safe, healthy moment amidst this like really scary chaos.
One of the best things about doing this virtually is that we can actually see you sort of like close to your place of work, right? Like, are we looking at you, Josh, where you wrote this book?
I wrote, so you're seeing the wall behind me. The wall I'm looking at, through there is a couch, and I write lying down as much as possible with my computer, my laptop on my stomach. I think some people, treat writing as a job that you wanna dress up for. You sit at a desk and you hammer away as if at a typewriter. And I like to be as close to a state of like total stasis and immobilization and comfort as I can, because otherwise I'll be like, I'm itchy, can't write.
Rebecca, are you where you normally lie down with your laptop on you?
Oh, no, I never lie down. I am where I write now, but I am not where I wrote Hex. I wrote Hex in Hudson, New York. I was subletting an apartment from a Dutch poet who had gone on a poetry residency rather conveniently right after I left the city. And I spent 9 months there, kind of similar to Josh, not just like really zoned in, but at a desk.
So now that we're situated, what are we drinking? What's everyone got? I know you guys made sort of specialty cocktails and mocktails for tonight.
I have, we made a quarantini. We've been well sheltered here. My wife Maris and I have been making the portmanteau come true. It seemed like a good bit, but then we got some vermouth and olives and really brought it to life. And it's delicious. It is vaguely book themed in that it is, there's a lot of the book about spending time with my wife and our relationship. And this is something we certainly share, is like briny martinis that taste kind of like on the precipice of drowning in the ocean.
Which is a cool move, because there's a whole piece in your book about learning to drink and also disliking beer.
Yeah.
Both of which are beautifully told and very funny. So I'm glad that you found a drink that is a little bit fun for you.
Thank you.
Yeah. I am not drinking tonight. My husband and I are expecting. So I have created a mocktail for everybody who's not drinking tonight. And it's called the Citrus Sanitizer. Pretty simple situation with cranberry juice, grapefruit seltzer, and a lime. Zesty.
Well, that is exciting. That is way more exciting than your quarantini, Josh. Sorry, she outdid you.
I'm only drinking for one.
Well, that sounds great. I'm drinking water and hot water with lemon because I gotta stay focused. I need to really ask the hard hitting questions. And let's start. So Rebecca, will you start off by telling us a little bit about this excellent novel, Hex, which everyone can see? I'm just going to stand with it while you discuss it.
Oh, how nice. I'll do that too. I have my hardcover, which just came in, and it's so beautiful. I do want to thank everybody at Viking Books at Penguin Random House for making it just a lovely object. And it, just the cover, judge it by its cover, go and it's very nice. I wrote this book in sort of a fit of literary energy that is totally unlike anything I've experienced before. My first novel, The Sunlit Night, took 6 years to write. This novel came to me in a flash, and it's pretty feverish. It's written in very short sections, which I think hopefully make it pretty zippy to read. And it's about 6 people who basically fall in love with each other simultaneously. And what I wanted to do there is create a geometry, create a hexagonal geometry, design it as a math problem, and see what happens when 6 figures are put in maximum exposure against each other, toward each other, in every possible kind of relationship. There's also a fair amount of botany in it. It deals pretty heavily with poisonous plants and their antidotes, which has taken on a whole new angle right now. But I had a lot of fun working on it, and it's a quick little number.
And Josh, I'm going to read the blurb from the cover of your book. It's by your former boss, John Oliver, the host of Last Week Tonight, with John Oliver. The blurb says, "If you only read one book in your life, it probably shouldn't be this one. However, if you're not operating an inexplicable one-book policy, these stories are funny, touching, and more than worth your time." So tell us about this book. It looks like the guy on the cover.
It looks a lot like me. It's an incredible likeness. Thank you. And I feel like I will follow Rebecca's lead and thank the good people at Harper Perennial and Mindy Tucker, who took the photograph from the cover, which came together like without my knowledge even. She's incredibly brilliant, and the Harper design team kind of reached out to her and were like, "Hey, we really need a photo soon. Do you have time to sit with Josh and like take some pictures?" And she said, "Oh, here's one that we took like 2 years ago. This should be the book cover." And they're like, "Great." So she's just magnificent. So this book, it's an essay collection about me, the only topic in which I'm a remotely qualified expert, and it's some stories. I think the theme of it is the difference. I was a sweet small Jewish boy, and now I'm a mid-sized Jewish man, and it's about being a nice child and growing up and trying to be a good person, and where that overlaps and where those diverge, where those ideas diverge and overlap.
So you describe yourself in the intro as having a, quote, "a wet paint personality, bright and shiny and vulnerable to the elements." And that actually sounds like something you might hear, Rebecca, in your novel, Hex. But Josh, I wanted to know, what was it like to write something so personal, to bear this all in print? And how does this compare to the world of comedy, which is essentially your day job of, doing stand-up versus writing really personal stories?
That's a great question. I mean, my stand-up is very personal too. And there's a couple stories that have been, I joke that like a couple of the stories in the collection are adapted from stand-up with like more feelings put in, just like time for like a little extra time for the truth. And I think it was a pretty smooth transition in terms of like the vulnerability of it all. I'm used to trying to really say what I mean on stage in a way that like feels genuine to audiences and feels genuine to me as I'm performing it. But there definitely is a level of vulnerability in that, like, my editor, Stephanie Hitchcock, who's amazing, was really good about being like, "Josh, you just wrote like 500 words that are just like about the Beastie Boys, full digression from what the story is about. That's nothing. Like, write about like what you thought and felt." And so it was like kind of peeling back the armor of like getting to just riff and be silly in a sincere way, to like get to like cut right through to the feeling. And it was a really exciting challenge, and I like am so immensely grateful to Stephanie for like always pushing me to meet that challenge instead of like being satisfied with just like 250 pages of like, shoelaces are weird, right?
There is a lot of Beastie Boys in here, though.
I mean, it's very important to my life and personality. I have their book, the Beastie Boys book, but I haven't finished it because I started it about 2 years ago. 2 years ago, I was driving in like kind of between cities in Oregon, and I put it on, in the first chapter was about what a great friend and collaborative force the late Adam Yauch was, and I started like tearing up behind the wheel of this rental car and was like, I'm gonna crash this damn car if I keep listening to this book. And it's just like, so this is the wet paint personality. I was like, this is just so emotionally rigorous to think about one of my deceased creative heroes, and so I have not yet revisited the book.
One day. Now's a good time. You probably have a lot more free time on your hands.
That's true.
So Rebecca, your first novel, as you mentioned, The Sunlit Night, is being made into a film starring Jenny Slate. So was there more pressure or less on your second novel? And even though it's fiction, I would imagine there's also a lot of that same really making yourself vulnerable when you put this novel out into the world.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It's writing a second novel is such a different process and experience than the first. My first novel was definitely rooted in a journey that I took to the Norwegian Arctic, and then the fiction joined the reality there. So everything that happens in that story is fiction, but the basic situation of it was very close to my heart. And then we did go back to the very place where I lived in the Arctic to film the movie, which was another kind of jumbo meta revisiting of real life experience through a technical lens that was completely jaw-dropping to me. I had never seen, just the equipment alone that's involved in making movies is pretty awe-inspiring. So The Sunlit Night continues to be a decade plus exploration of different ways of experiencing the same material at different levels of artistic and creative endeavor. Hex, on the other hand, in many ways was more private and at the same time less personal. As I mentioned, I really created it as algebra. I was really interested in these six figures and their interactions with each other. And before they had names, before they had characters, they had their shape, they had their geometry. I learned how to do homework at Stuyvesant High School, which I imagine many people in the audience are familiar with. It's a math school, it's a science school. They like you to do your algebra. And I think to a certain extent, I've always had that in me. So I sat down to write this book and really created it as a puzzle. And that's different than traveling to Norway and writing about travel. It was way more analytical and way more, to a certain extent, calculated. So I really have loved having those two different creative experiences, and they both feel really vibrant.
And your protagonist, Nell Barber, is a recently expelled botany student, and I'm so curious how you learned all the terminology. It's so interesting, this world we sort of enter into, and you make it understandable to us. So I imagine there was the process of you making that understandable, the world of plants and poison. So what drew you to this world, and what were some of the fantastic things you learned along the way?
It's a really good question, and you put it really well. If it is comprehensible to the reader, and I certainly hope it is because it was incomprehensible to me at the start of the project, and I had to pretty rigorously explain it to myself. So any clarity that has made its way into the book is the clarity that the world was able to transmit to me via this pretty extraordinary network of amateur and professional horticulturalists and gardeners and herbal specialists and witchcraft experts. I did a lot of research ranging from something as physical and immediate as the Cloisters Museum in New York has an extraordinary medieval garden and a lot of information about how plants have been used over time. And then there's the universe of the internet, which will give you endless information if you are willing to pick through it. So I did learn a great deal, first about the basics of planting. I had never had a garden before, so I literally didn't know when you plant bulbs as opposed to seeds, which plants start as bulbs and which as seeds, which is an awful confession to make. And I hope those who read the book who know far more than I do, will forgive it. I did really learn a lot. And Nell is learning too. She's a student and she's doing her best to wade through something that's complicated and at times really scary. Some of my favorite things to learn about were some of the more mystical lineups between certain plants and certain properties. Cloves being reported to stop others from gossiping about you, that kind of thing. You can't make it up, but somebody did, and then it was widely spread. So there's a lot of really interesting folklore and fascinating science, and I was trying to put those together.
So, Josh, your own folklore, so to speak, is niceness. That's really the theme of this book, Nice Try. You write that you're a former nice guy who is trying to be a good guy. You also write that technically you're Jewish, but more than that, you were raised nice, which is just an amazing thing. I love that. So how does being nice work with your day job in comedy?
Oh, I don't think they're incompatible. I feel like you can be very kind and very nice and still make effective and hilarious. I mean, that's not my word for me. That's my word for others. Comedy, and I think that's like, it's like kind of a myth that you have to be this like acerbic critic, just like that's bullshit and that's bullshit and that's bullshit, is like, that is kind of the caricature. I mean, there's a lot of comedy that is really wonderful in the vein of like an acerbic teller of ugly truth, but I don't think it's the only way to make comedy. So I think part of my project as like a writer and comedian is figuring out how to like make a really try to make comedy that is like both substantial and like resonant, but also like gentle and generous. Also, Rebecca, I auditioned for your movie.
What?
Did I ever tell you that?
No.
I auditioned to play, it was like one of the kind of like bro-y finance people in like a very early scene. It might have been the first scene. And so it was a very small part. And I went in and it was just like super against type, and I ate it really hard in the audition. But it was so funny. I was I was truly so excited. I like, most of the time when I get like auditions like that, like this is a 3-line role in a movie, I'll be like, I'm busy and bad at acting. But this one I was like, it's Rebecca's movie. And so I went in, I did
Josh,
the audition.
guess what?
What?
That scene is no longer in the movie. So like, I'm so glad you didn't waste your time.
No, that's okay. That's so funny. And I also, as long as we're here, sorry to short circuit, Stephanie.
Do it.
I'm so dazzled by the fact that you said Hex was written as like an algebra problem to start, because it's so like raw and human, and it like, reading it, I was just like, I felt like someone was reaching into my human body. Like,
wow,
it was
great.
Yeah. It was so
nice,
good.
Josh. Thank you.
You're welcome. Just being real. But anyway, circling back, I think you can.
Wait, do you remember any of the 3 lines that you were auditioned with?
No, I wish I did. I bet I have it in my email, but I don't want to like in front of the screen and everything. But let me see if I can find it at the end. Maybe while Rebecca's answering your question, I'll check.
So comedy, you can be nice in comedy.
But I think you can be kind, and I think a lot of people who make abrasive comedy are also really kind as people. It's like it's not like a 1-to-1. And a lot of people, I think, who make kind of blithe and pleasant comedy, not a lot, but like, it doesn't mean that you're a good person.
It's funny because reading the book and reading about you growing up, there's sort of this like witty nerdiness that we see throughout, and it actually seems like it sets you up really, really well to be smart and funny and do this professionally. And I realize I keep referring to your day job, but will you tell us a little bit about what you've done, where you're working now, and that trajectory?
So I
want to know how funny you are, basically.
Well, I have a very
so
good resume.
Funny.
I mean, you can tell how funny I am just from this, that's your discretion. But I have a very good comedy resume, which is I've done a lot of stand-up, but I've written a book, and I've written a lot of late night television comedy. So I worked for 5 years at Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. I did one year there as the web producer, doing their social and digital kind of comedy writing, and then 4 years as a staff writer, which is really amazing. John is incredible. Their whole staff is like really brilliant and incredible. It's just, it like wouldn't work if people weren't super smart and hardworking and talented. That I think the way they make that show is like so ambitious, and they just like nail it. And that's me from the outside, not as someone who, I have a horse in the race, but that horse left the race a long time ago. So they're eating carrots somewhere. And before that, I did a little tiny bit of work for Billy on the Street with Billy Eichner, who's amazing. And currently I'm a writer and producer on Desus and Mero on Showtime, which is hosted by Desus Nice and the kid Mero, who are like two of the most spontaneously, incisively, like immediately incisively funny people that I've ever met in the whole world. And it's just like a real joy to get to work with that team too. It's like it is a fully different production and writing challenge and excitement, and I'm like very grateful to have gotten to work with and for people that I admire and respect, and who are like exactly as you'd hope of them. So that's kind of like my last almost 7 years in comedy. And before that, I did a lot of like magazine writing and short humor pieces and bombing on the road.
So Rebecca, you mentioned the experience of filming, of watching something that you wrote. You also wrote the screenplay come to life. Does that affect you when you're writing your second novel? Are you thinking, who would play Nell? Who would play all these characters? Who like, are you casting them in your mind, and does that distract from the writing process?
That's a really interesting question. It's not where I thought I was going, because I was actually working on the Sunlit Night screenplay, on revisions of it while I was writing Hex. So in my mind, there's something screenplay-y about Hex. It's very dialogue based. It's way quicker paced and more tightly organized than it would have been had I not spent the previous 2 years writing a screenplay and learning from scratch what a screenplay is. It's an utterly different format. And the task of compressing 250 pages of prose into a 100-page screenplay is an enormous education in what has to happen in a scene and what has to be left out and how to move the action along. So I think that's why Hex is shorter and quicker and way more interested in conversation than in description. That being said, I wasn't thinking about casting because I didn't even believe at that point that the Sunlit Night movie was really going to get made with real people who are actors who were cast. That was all beyond my wildest dreams, and frankly still is. So I wasn't sitting there thinking who could be Nell, although obviously Jenny Slate would be great as Nell. Also, and a million other people, anybody would be great as everybody. Everybody's very talented, but I wasn't going there. I was just writing the book, but it is informed by the format, certainly.
It's interesting you say that, because there really is, a zippiness to this book, and like we said before, there's a lot of denseness. There's a lot of technical terms. There's this. It's essentially the sort of the working notebooks of this sort of disgraced PhD student, and they're written towards Joan, who is her former advisor, and really the object of her obsession, and is one of the 6, as you mentioned. So it is kind of funny, because as a reader, I was thinking, wow, this is moving so, like, it's not that it's a short book, it's a substantial book, but it moves really, really quickly. So it's interesting to hear you say that there's sort of a reason behind that.
Yeah.
That wasn't a question, that was just a thought. Josh, let's flip to you. I like this. You guys are flipping, like the cameras are flipping and we're flipping book to book. You wouldn't think these books have a lot in common, but as we know, there is like this heart, there's a real heart in both of them, and there's a real deep humanness.
Thank you.
So, Josh, I want to ask you something. We learn in your book that you immersed yourself in rap music while at summer camp. Similarly, a world with its own taxonomy and lexicography, just like the world of botany. Can you tell us about the summer that everyone listened to rap at camp while studying for their bar mitzvahs, and how that sort of widened your world in a way?
Yeah. So to circle back, the Beastie Boys are definitely like entry level, not even entry level, just an entry point into hip hop culture and rap music for like adolescent Jews of the suburbs. I imagine nationwide, but this was North Shore suburban Boston. And it was, I mean, it was like 1997, 98, and it was the Beastie Boys were back with an album. So like I'm like the narrating a documentary about my own life, but it's the Intergalactic was a huge hit in 1998, which is around the time we were studying for our bar mitzvahs and having our bar mitzvahs, and it was like starting there and then going back through like the other Beastie Boys singles and then their full catalog, and then being like, what else is there? Just like so ravenous for this style of music that I think we'd mostly absorbed on the radio, singles here and there, but it was the time we were kind of like old enough to have our own taste and like chart our own course in terms of like, this is what I want to listen to when I spend time by myself and I have a small amount of money. I have $16. I can go to a Sam Goody or a Strawberries and buy a cassette in one of those like big plastic anti-theft devices, and they'll pop it off very satisfyingly, and then I'll come home and like listen to a boombox very quietly in my bedroom and listen to like Biggie or Redman, and it just like all kind of spiraled from there. It felt very like exciting and a little bit taboo, and it would, but like very it was just like such visceral music to me, and the Beastie Boys were for sure the way in. And then it stayed very East Coast for me, not to get too nitty gritty about it, but I was like Biggie over Tupac as a young person, and there's something that's like this like hyper lyrical, hyper verbal, dense texts that you have to parse little by little, right? Whether it's because there are references to things you don't know about because you're a child, or in my experience, and you have to like figure that out pre-Google, or whether it's because the slang itself is like not native to your hometown or region, and it's decoding that and finding meaning in it and finding like the places to latch on that are meaningful to you, in the same way that like a haftarah is in Hebrew, a language that I can read but not speak, which at this point feels preposterous to me, that like that I knew how to read these characters and pronounce and intone and sing, and I would know, maybe one word out of 40, where I'd be like, shalom, got that one. And so it was like a very similar project to like learn these rhythms and learn these dense texts, and then like extract what meaning was relevant and germane to my life, which for both Nas's 1994 album Illmatic and the Kaddish, the amount of meaning total that was relevant to my life was some.
I like that you're like a Wu-Tang Talmud scholar at this point.
Yeah. The Wu-Tang Talmud clan.
I remember so much my cantor when I was preparing for my bat mitzvah, my cantor telling me that I could start saying the football scores in the middle of my haftorah and nobody would know. But the problem is then you would have to know how to say football scores in Hebrew. So nobody knew enough to even do it wrong.
Yeah.
I totally understand.
So funny. But that's also the kind of thing too that made stuff so opaque for me, right? As like you're an adult. Now say all these words that you don't fully understand. That's like what being a man is. Because
and then no one else understands.
Yeah, and because like if you can put the football score in the middle and people won't even notice, it's like, then what are we doing here?
Right. That's
Guys, Hebrew school, everyone needs to like make these things a little better, right? This is like a real a call for the Jewish community to, I don't know, to do what, but you didn't know that this virtual book talk was going there. Did you guys? I want to remind
it
everyone,
is for the Jewish Book Council. So
yeah, no,
I was thinking there might be like kind of ominous robes. A Jewish Book Council sounds really foreboding.
well, yeah, my robe is in the bathroom.
Fair.
So everyone, I want to encourage you, use this. If you look at the bottom of your menu, there's a Q&A button and you can click and add some questions. We're going to get to those in a little bit, but I'm not done. I'm not ready to yield the floor. Let's switch this back to you, Rebecca. Your character Nell, she's so deeply human, and she's trying so desperately to alter these poisonous elements and make them less dangerous. And there's such a frailty there and such a sense of being like truly merely mortal. And I've been thinking about that a lot lately, as you mentioned earlier, this idea that we are just human beings in the face of particularly the horror that we're dealing with right now with coronavirus, COVID-19. We're just trying to exist in the world. And am I going too far to make that connection? I mean, should I just like stop reading the news and trying to connect it to novels, or is there something there?
No, I don't think it can be avoided. I mean, when I start reading from my own book now, it has a whole new connotation that obviously when I wrote it in 2017 wasn't built into it, but the quest to find a cure, find an antidote, find a remedy is so painful because it's so urgent. And this is the story of somebody who doesn't have much faith in her own ability to change anything, but has a lot of confidence in her work ethic. And it's about the conviction that if you really slam yourself into a task, regardless of your ability or your skill, well, that's not exactly right. But regardless of your confidence, there's something to be gained in the effort alone, and that's obviously being seen right now in the extraordinary efforts of the medical community and so many communities who are working effortlessly against something that they can't have any confidence in, but it's just a matter of the work.
And I have to ask, your book comes out next week, and I imagine you had I saw you had a really big tour. We were supposed to do this live in New York City. You had a bunch of other places you're going. I know there's everything going on around us. I obviously, keeping things in perspective, but still, it must totally suck, right? That you can't go on your book tour. I mean, what are you doing? Are virtual events helping? What can people who are watching this, how can they help? They're all going to obviously buy both of these books after. Sorry, Josh, your book came out last year, so you're sort of
buy his book.
yeah, both.
Hi, Rebecca's book first.
What is it like to be an author with a book coming out in the middle of this sort of travesty, this global pandemic?
I appreciate the question. It was hugely disappointing to work on a book for 3 years. We chose the publication date 2 years ago, and to arrive at it and find that it's at the center of extraordinary crisis is heartbreaking, because part of work is celebration, and to not be able to release something that was created in solitude into a social context and to celebrate with one's friends and family is a huge disappointment. That being said, this disappointment obviously pales in the context of what is no longer a disappointment, but true tragedy. So it's been pretty difficult for me to understand how to even feel my own disappointment. But the generosity of the publishing community has been immense. Many of the events that I was supposed to do in person will now be virtual. And more than anything, I'm hoping that people will buy the book when it comes out on Tuesday and read it at home, and that might contribute to some sense of keeping our minds active, keeping our culture active, keeping ourselves distracted. If you need a new book at your house, I happen to have written one for you. So I do hope that it'll still have a life in people's homes right now. And yeah, please buy the book. I would love that.
And I am so glad that we could celebrate both these books. And it's a great time for books. Can't go anywhere. So Josh, one last question for you, and we will jump. The cues are flowing in, so we'll give them some A's soon. Josh, I want to talk to you about the canned chicken noodle soup that you carried around during high school, and you gave it to people who looked like they were having a bad day.
Yeah, deeply humiliating.
The nicest thing I've ever heard. I think we all could use a can of chicken soup right now. Why did you do that, and how can we do that for each other now?
So I appreciate your generosity in the framing of the question, because I mean, in the book and in my brain, I feel that with like deep humiliation as someone who is just like aching to try to show that he wants to help, but like has no real idea. Because like, you know, I went to a small public high school. There's no way to open and heat a can of chicken noodle soup during the school day. It's not allowed. And so it was like kind of just, it was like a totem more than it was a practical help. And I think about that a lot as just like, that was part of my process of like learning how to do good meaningfully for people. And that was, I would say, a well-intentioned misstep on that path. But I think like that what I learned from it is like doing practical good in ways that really benefit people, and like doing good for people on their terms rather than the terms that you decide would be good for them or for the world as a blanket. And that's something like I think about all the time of like that to me is like the difference between nice and good, which I kind of brought up earlier, is like the difference between doing something that looks nice and the difference and on the other hand doing something that is like meaningful and substantially assistive or comforting or productive. And so that's something that I think is like my roundabout answer to your question. I will also say I dug in my email and found the sides from that audition.
You're joking.
No, for real. I don't delete emails. It's part of my general slovenly lifestyle. And so here is, I had 2 lines and they were separated by 2 other lines. So I'll read the whole thing and I'll give a little context. And this is at this is in a dining room at like a dinner party.
Yeah.
And okay, I didn't do a good job then. I might not do a good job now. So I played Timothy and I have the first line. And I go, Larry was such a wimp about the merger. We just let it slide. And then Mr. Mason says, isn't the direct investment a problem at this point? And then Janet to Timothy says, honey, I need some salt. And then I say, it is. When I try to find, it is.
No, Josh, don't do it. Don't do it. That line happens to be vulgar and it's no longer in the movie.
Okay.
It doesn't serve any.
These
are the extra deleted scenes. This is a scene cut from a movie starring someone who was not in that movie.
That was the inside scoop. Okay, I think this is a great time. We have a bunch of questions coming in. I want to say, first, there were some nice things that people said that I just want to say. This is Sherry. She says, not really a question, but I'm still looking forward to reading both of these books. Thank you, Sherry.
Thank you, Sherry.
Thank you.
That's
so much.
That's the best, not a question, more of a comment I've ever experienced.
It's really the dream. Yeah.
Short and complimentary. Someone else says the quality of the video and the conversation is excellent. So that's good. So let's go to some of the questions. Oh, okay. This comes from Becca. Could you both talk about humor and how you integrated it into your books? Josh, what decisions do you make about including incidents from your personal life into your writing? Rebecca, I really like the dark humor in Hex. Is it inspired by anything in particular?
Oh, I want to hear your answer.
Ooh. No, it isn't. It was the totally natural voice that came out for Nell in one go, as if it existed out of time and space. I've never had a more sort of organic and forceful experience of voice in writing, and I don't know where it came from.
Whoa, that's incredible. The voice is so strong and so thorough. It's like a real powerhouse voice.
Thank you. As is yours.
Oh.
Your whole book is just like as if everybody could tell their stories of their own life with the best possible punchlines. Nobody gets the luxury of doing that, but your book is just like really sweet, interesting stories told in the best possible
Thank
way.
you. Oh my gosh, what a
Yeah.
lovely compliment.
Yeah.
This is great. You guys don't even need me. I might just like go get some
No,
dinner.
get out of here. No, stay
Okay.
here.
This.
Um,
Yes.
so my answer is
Oh yeah.
about
Sorry. I forgot to
including.
let you
That's
answer.
what. Oh, that's what, if you don't. I mean, screw
Answer.
me.
No, the question was for you.
The so the question was about including incidents from my own life, which I try to be very mindful of the way that affects other people in my life because I don't live through things in a vacuum. I try to represent things with humor and fairness. I had a couple people close to me read for like emotional accuracy. I had my wife read all the stuff that involved her before I published it because like again, I'm not in the business of writing jokes that I'm like, well, if you don't like it, then hit the road. Like I want to continue being married to my lovely wife. And so I tried not to say anything that she felt misrepresented her or represented her badly. Same with my parents and my sister. I gave them kind of the pages about them that I wanted to make sure that I wasn't misremembering or saying something that felt hurtful and unfair, or I could have found like a more um, fair and generous way to position them. And there was very little that had to change. I think I was pretty conscientious. And everything else I kind of wrote it as I remembered. I did ask a couple friends for like a couple specific details about like certain nights. I think some of that even actually got cut from the book, but I just wanted to make sure like my memories weren't throwing people under the bus to my own glorification.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a double question. The first one is, what authors influenced you? And the second is, this one's a good one. What voice is missing in recent Jewish writing? So your influences doesn't have to be Jewish, and then what I guess you think is missing in the Jewish writing world, which seems to me full of things, but that's for you guys, not me.
Wowie. I'll go first with an influencer. Grace Paley really did a number on me while I was writing Hex. While I was writing Hex. For those unfamiliar with Grace Paley, she wrote an extraordinary amount in many different forms, mostly short stories. And actually, now that I'm saying it, it wasn't an extraordinary amount. It was a rather essential and truly significant, but not enormous body of work. While she did a great amount of women's rights work in the city, and was really a profoundly decent and uh, sort of visionary human being. She writes in a hilarious, sometimes Yiddish inflected character voice that I couldn't get enough of. And I really recommend the new collected Grace Paley Reader with an introduction by George Saunders. And George Saunders's introduction to it will really lay out for you how and why it is so exquisite. I don't know what I have to think a little bit about what's missing. That's a good hard question, and I don't have a ready answer. Josh.
Great. So to me, I'm gonna be a little snotty. To me, David Sedaris has always been like kind of a beacon of like, that's how you write a funny essay. They're so human and heartfelt and tender, but also like so like laugh out loud funny. Similarly, while I was working on this, I think, or just before, while I was writing Nice Try, I read Sachi Cool's book of essays, One Day We'll All Be Dead and None of This Will Matter, which is great. Like her point of view is so strong and like her writing is so voicey and like really felt like her through and through. And Samantha Irby's book collection, We Are Never Meeting in Real Life. And so those are like a few of the essay collections I found really inspirational. A lot of the time I find like books that are funny are like not funny. they're like occasionally wry. Like Rebecca, your book has like incredibly funny, dark moments. I feel truly this is like this. I don't know if this is a comparison you considered at all, but it's like when people talk about why Confederacy of Dunces is a good funny book, I'm like, no, that's more true of your book. Just like character and voice and like misfortune and like compulsion. Uh, and I think Confederacy of Dunces is like horrendously overrated. And when I read your book, I was like, oh, that's what people think it is.
Huh, that's so nice. I've never read Confederacy of Dunces. I'll just take the compliment. Thank you so much.
Great. Yeah. I mean it sincerely, not like no backhandedness about it. But that's like people played it up legendarily to me. But so like a lot of my influences are like stand-up-y, like really sincere. I'm such a hometown person. Like Mike Birbiglia, his work, which he's translated has also done it in essay collections and stand-up, and Gary Gulman, and also like John Mulaney, I find to be like, oh, that storytelling has like a tightness that I aspire to on the page, because I think things can be funny. Like you don't have to like make things less funny because they're a book. You just have to make them additionally more sincere and heartfelt. And missing in Jewish writing, I think that's like a really tough question. I have a pretty incomplete like point of view on that. I think I would like in Jewish humor, I think people I would like to see more of, just like, and if they exist in numbers, and I haven't found them myself, of like more Jews of color and more like working class Jewish humor, which I think is like certainly present, but like I think there's kind of this Jewish humor as like collegey, like erudite, my stupid face.
Okay, 2 more questions for you, Josh. How much does Jewish culture contribute to your comedy? And what do you prefer, performing stand-up, writing the book, or writing for a television show? Or is it all enjoyable?
Great questions. Jewish humor was some of my most formative humor. Mel Brooks was just like everything as a child when I was like a young person. Just his films, my parents would give me the 2,000-Year-Old Man albums that he did with Carl Reiner, like on CD, and I would play the heck out of them. And Jewish culture and like humor were like incredibly formative. And I think like the Jews of Boston stand-up comedy have been like really big brothery to me. I mentioned Gary Gulman, John Fish, and Mike Kaplan, who are like really great comedians. I think have always had like, while Boston stand-up has like a reputation as like kind of abrasive and aggressive, they did it in a very Jewy way that I felt, and were also very like encouraging of and nurturing towards me personally. So like deeply influential. And then the second question was, which do I prefer? I like the balance of them all. I like to go to an office and work on a project and see it on television, and I find that very satisfying, and I like collaborating. And then I like going on stage at night and saying whatever I want, and not having to like format it for another person's voice, or submit it for the approval of a television network. And I really like writing a book because it felt so satisfying to like make something and that is enduring in a way that is maybe feels a little bigger than just me saying a bunch of things. And it was like an immensely gratifying and challenging and wonderful experience.
So here's a double question for both of you. At what point in your lives did you realize you were going to be writers, and would you ever consider writing a book together?
I would love to write a book together.
Sure.
That would be so nice. My mother, who might be in this chat, I don't know. I can't see you this time, Mom, but if you're there, I love you. My mother will tell you that when I was in the first grade, I wrote an essay about the question, what is wonderful? And my answer was my gymnastics team. And she says that that's when I started writing. She's probably correct about that. For me, I remember more in high school taking poetry and short story classes, and then certainly in college really committing to it. What was the other question?
Would we ever write a book together?
Oh yeah, I already got that one. Yes,
Yeah,
please.
yeah. We should, if there's any editors here, just like, it's probably going to be good. So just like, probably you're going to want to throw a bunch of money at us for it. My answer to the question, being a writer, I also was like kind of a wordy kid. In that I like wrote something that was like a deeply tangential honorable mention on like a poetry contest as like a little kid that like hung up on the library wall, I think, in my town, which was very exciting and flattering. I think it took me longer than I thought to do what I'd hoped to do. And I almost I almost like forgot that was the goal. I came into college. I went to Brandeis for the Jew cred, and I went in thinking I was going to be a playwright. I'd written a play in high school that had like won a state playwriting contest, and I was like, maybe this is someone said I'm good at this, so that's what I'll do. That's like how I operate generally. And so I did that, and I kind of fell out of the theater department pretty quickly. It just like the other parts of it didn't suit what I wanted, and I immediately transitioned to being like a short fiction major, and I wrote a short fiction thesis. And I was like, great, I'm gonna write funny books that will be like literary but like humor. That's like what I want to do. And then I spent like the next decade not doing that. And then I kind of came around to it in mostly my 30s, I guess now. And it feels like I co-wrote a book with my friend Joe Berkowitz, who's an excellent nonfiction author and journalist in his own right. But I like writing this book, I was like, oh, this was the thing I thought I was going to be doing. And I'm so glad that I got to do it.
Okay, so Rebecca, I just want you to know that your editor, Allison, is on board with the double book.
Let's do it, Josh. Sign us
we got
up.
this.
So I think you guys just signed a contract, a virtual contract. Okay, I'm gonna do one final like mega question about quarantine. Someone's asking if being in quarantine has any effect on your writing. Does staying inside make it more difficult to get in the writing mode? Does it make it easier? Then we have another, what are your top sanity preserving activities during this time? Do you have any projects on the horizon? Authors love being asked that. And then this does feel related. Just try to remember all these questions. What book is in your queue that you're currently very excited to start reading? So are you becoming a better writer because you have to sit at home all day? How are you staying sane? And what are you going to read?
You go first, Josh.
Okay. I don't think that being kind of confined to my home has made me a better writer. I find myself like pretty distracted lately. I'm pretty productive generally, but like I don't think I'm doing my best creative work with like 20% of my brain at all times being like, oh, this is scary and bad, and I have to stay home because otherwise I might get sick or might get someone else sick. So it's been tough just to have like a substantial portion of your brain default occupied by this giant thing. The two books that I have actually I have a few books queued up. The new Samantha Irby's new collection, Wow No Thank You, is like top of list, and I'm excited to read. My friends who are the Welcome to Night Vale podcast just put out a book about the faceless old woman who lives in your house, who is on their podcast voiced by Mara Wilson, and I'm scheduled to do an event with them in May, so I'm excited to like it's like a fun excuse to read a fun book. Projects on the horizon. Desus and Mero returns to Showtime Monday night remotely. Desus and Mero in their own homes. Our post-production team are like absolute wizards and geniuses, and figured out how to make the show without anyone ever being in the same room as each other, and it's really incredible, and I'm like very excited that we get to keep making the show. gosh, I'm trying to think of what else I have like on the horizon. Nothing else. Oh, maybe a podcast soon. It was the timing of that is a little funky because it was supposed to start this month, and then there were some events. But it's going to be called Make My Day, and it's a comedy game show. And then, did I answer all your questions?
Yes, you ticked them all off.
Great.
Rebecca, what about you? Are you a better writer inside with quarantine? What's keeping you sane, and what are you reading, and what are you working on? A
Great.
four-parter.
Doing it to it. In the quarantine has overlapped to the day with my pre-publication experience. Like the little graphic showing my book tour was sent to me on the day that my publisher's offices closed down. And then on the next day, it was decided that I would not go on that tour. So it has been a sort of day-by-day parallel between the news and the way I'm able to release this book. So it hasn't been a question of new writing for me in the past couple of weeks as much as a question of recovering from the changes to what had been scheduled and trying to find creative ways to release this book without any physical presence behind it. So again, I love that this event happened online, and I so appreciate everyone being here tonight. Staying sane. I love to cook dinner with my husband. We're about to do that right now. That's really I can't wait. At the end of the day, every day, it's a big pleasure. I am excited to read a whole bunch of books. I was reading this morning about a book that came out this week that's going through a similar process of being unraveled, about Roman history by a novelist named Katie Simpson Smith. I believe it's called The Everlasting. It might have that title slightly wrong, but Katie Simpson Smith. And then a couple of friends have books coming out. Justin Taylor has a beautiful memoir coming out called Writing with the Ghost. Marie Helen Bertino has a book called Parakeet. That's a really beautiful exploration of marriage coming out. There's so many novelists whose books are scheduled for this year who may be impacted, and I'm excited to read them all and support them all. We've all been supporting each other a lot. And then finally, upcoming projects. I would love to write the screenplay of Hex. It's very well suited to that. And then I'd also really like to write a television screenplay that's sort of inspired by an essay that I wrote recently for the Paris Review that will be coming out next week, about the social circle around Virginia Woolf in the 1920s and 30s, and how those sort of high literary, high aristocracy cultural figures were really breaking rules right and left in ways that haven't been fully explored. So I'd kind of like to write a TV show that's somewhere between The Crown and Elena Ferrante's My Brilliant Friend, like passionate female relationships, but also high polish and glamour. That's another screenplay I'm thinking about.
I love that. And for now, we're all going to buy and read Hex and Nice Try. Josh, Rebecca, thank you so much. Thank you to our big audience for being here.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, Naomi and Jenna.
Thank you, Naomi and Jenna and Miri of the Jewish Book Council and the Jewish Museum. You can get all the links in the chat tab. I will have a shameless plug. If you need a Haggadah, you should get Tablet's new Passover Haggadah. Passover is still happening, even though the world is insane. Thanks to you both.
Thank you. What a pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I really appreciate it.
Me too. Thank you so much.